The subject actually is rule of law and rule by law. By mistake, it has been typed as, I think, rule B law. How does one explain the two expressions? Because ex facto, they carry the same meaning. Ladies and gentlemen, there was a time when the world was ruled by kings and emperors. They had unlimited powers, but the state which they represented played a very limited role. Broadly speaking, the role of the state remained confined to defending the boundary or territory of the state, collection of revenue, and the maintenance of law and order, of which judicial system was a very small part. Because at the end of the day, it was the king who decided everything. He was the fountainhead of justice. He was the law unto himself. So what he said was law, what he did was law, what he delivered was justice, whether there was justice or no justice. But if you minutely examine, you will find all these attributes or the roles which the state played those days were in the interest of the king or the emperor, as the case may be. Whose boundary or territory was the king defending? Obviously, he is not of his subjects, because vaster his territory, more powerful he would have been regarded. If you come to collection of revenue, the revenue was not collected for the purpose of distributing amongst the subjects or the people of the state, but to enable the king or emperor to live like a king or emperor in his palace. The maintenance of law and order was again in the interest of the king himself, because if there would have been disturbance in the society, he would not have been able to enjoy his life as a king or emperor. So we will find that the state's role during the time of kings and emperors remained confined to his self-interest. So the state did not exist for people, people existed for the state. It was a selfish state. With the fall of kingship arose two kinds of systems. One was communism, the other was democracy. We are not here to debate which one was good, which one was bad. One common thread which passed between the two systems was that both of them declared to be welfare state. Now what's a welfare state? The welfare state is one where the state exists for the people, unlike what used to happen during the times of the kings and emperors. While in the past, the state was in the interest of the king or emperor, today the state stands for the welfare of the people of the state. Now in this, we have to understand the difference between the two. What's law? Let us not go into very jurisprudential explanations of law. In the simplest of words, law can be described as the norms of governance of a society. How one would conduct himself in the society is the law. And this law never remains constant. It keeps changing along with the change of the society. Many a times there may not be any change in the law. Still, the perception of the people having changed, the meaning of the law will change. I'll give you one small example. The definition of rape by and large in United Kingdom has been unlawful sexual intercourse by a man with a woman without her consent or against her will. I repeat, unlawful sexual intercourse by a man with a woman without her consent or against her will. The question arose whether within this definition a husband will fall if he happens to have sex with his wife without her consent or against her will. The court answered that by institution of marriage, a woman surrenders to her husband, and therefore he has a right over her body, and if he has sex forcibly with her, he does not commit any offense, because the word unlawful has to be read outside the institution of marriage. Times changed, people mindset changed, their perception changed. So silent till the law changed. How it changed? The same question arose in England, and this time the court said, gone are those days when man and woman were not equal. Today they are equal partners in the institution of marriage. And therefore this word unlawful has to be read within the institution of marriage. And if it is read within the institution of marriage, it will mean that if the husband has sex with his wife without her consent or against her will, it will amount to rape. No change in the law. Law has remained the same. But perception of the people having changed, the meaning of the law has changed. There are multiple circumstances, we are not on that. Then what remains the difference between the rule of law and rule by law? A rule of law is a rule for the welfare of the people. A rule by law is a mechanism to justify arbitrariness of a state. I will give you one example. Many of you might have thought that perhaps in the recent past, the Chief Justice of India, who has demitted office, he might have been the first one, or maybe before that Justice D.K. Mishra might have been the first one, or for that matter, one judge of the Supreme Court, I am forgetting, was the one to be impeached. But we don't know, in the pre-independence India there was a Chief Justice who had been impeached. And that ultimately led to Warren Hastings' impeachment. There was a gentleman called Nand Kumar. I am making it very short. This Nand Kumar made an allegation against Lord Warren Hastings in 1775, saying that he had taken bribe for making certain appointments. Nand Kumar was tried on the charge of forgery, and the trial was over within a week. The witnesses of the defense were completely unbelieved or disbelieved by the court. Nand Kumar was pronounced guilty and sentenced to death, and ultimately was hanged to death. This case came to be known as judicial murder, because this Eliza, I am forgetting the full name of the Chief Justice then, and Warren Hastings were childhood friends. They studied together. And it is surfaced later, when the Chief Justice of India was to be tried, was that he helped his friend in getting rid of Nand Kumar, who was making allegations against Warren Hastings. So it was a judicial murder. So what I am trying to demonstrate before you, that the law took its own course. A trial took place. Charges were framed. He pleaded not guilty. Witnesses were brought, they were examined, they were cross-examined. Defense produced their witnesses, they were examined, they were cross-examined, but with an ulterior motive to punish Nand Kumar, and eventually he was punished by death. So when you have this kind of a mechanism working, you have a rule by law, you don't have a rule of law. Because if you have a rule of law, then it has to be real, it has to be reasonable, fair, and just. If the law is unfair, unjust, unreasonable, it's a rule by law. When we became independent, under our constitution, there was a famous trial with the students of law will definitely know. The trial was A.K. Gopalan. In this case, it was a case of preventive detention. And what case was relied upon? In that particular case, that bishop, the law was that the person accused, if found guilty, will be thrown into burning oil. So the court said that even if this is the law, our Indian Supreme Court is saying, even if such is the law, action can be taken by the state in accordance with that law. Do you think any civilized society will throw a person into burning oil? And it was coming much later in 70s that Supreme Court came out with the concept of just, fair and reasonable law, which was the famous case of Menka Gandhi, where it said that before any person is condemned, any action is taken against him or her, he or she must be given an opportunity of showing cause or hearing. But what do we find even in the recent past happening? A staffer of the Supreme Court makes allegation of sexual exploitation against whom? None other than the Chief Justice of India. And the matter was brought on the board by the Chief Justice of India with 3 judges, and the bench was headed by Chief Justice of India. And the Chief Justice says on the top of his voice that these allegations are being made to malign the institution of judiciary. What are you doing thereby? Thereby you are saying that the staffer of your institution had made these allegations to malign the institution. She has an ulterior motive which has not been proved till date. Where was that lady? In the absence of the person whom you are condemning, you are making accusations. And when the order is passed, surprisingly remaining 2 judges signed the order. The Chief Justice of India does not sign, because he knew the fact that he could not have been a judge in the case where he was himself accused. He might have been falsely accused, that's a different question altogether, but it gave him no right to become a judge of his own cause. So the principles of natural justice which over centuries we have evolved, the humanity is evolved, it is basically for the purpose of protecting human rights. These are means, these are instruments for protecting human rights, that you will not be a judge of his own cause, you will not condemn a person without him or her being given an opportunity of hearing. These are all. But when we throw these principles into the wind and keep only confined to the law that we have made, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, that's only a rule by law and not rule of law. Because rule of law will strengthen the hands of the law in the real sense. And that you can understand it. I don't know how many of you have heard the name of Matthew Matheson, For your benefit, let me tell you that he was a missionary, a member of Oxford Mission, who came to establish an orphanage outside the city of Calcutta in 1920s and remained for a fairly long time. He wrote a letter to his mission, early part of 1920. And there he wrote, what kind of people these Indians are. They are so poor, so weak, so uneducated, and still they are dying for freedom and independence. They have no way of governing themselves, whereas the English people are giving them what is required and will hand over surely one day the reign of administration to the Indians when the Indians become capable of governing themselves. Was he right? Did India not deserve freedom and independence? The answer to this question is given by Matthew Matheson himself in 1940s, when England was being bombarded. Matthew Matheson writes that since the time bombing of England has started, I have started imagining a situation out of fear that a day might come when Germans will rule over the English people. And he says, if such a thing happens, I was imagining what will happen. English people are rich, poor, and Germans are rich. Germans are strong and English people are weak. Germans are literate and English people are illiterate. What will the English people want at that time? Will they ask for freedom and independence, or will they ask for what we call in Hindi, roti, kapra and makan? And there he says that obviously every Englishman would like to be independent and be freed from the shackles of slavery of the Germans. And he says, since the time I have started thinking in these lines, I have realized why every Indian is craving for independence. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have to understand somebody's pain and suffering, somebody's feelings, his or her anxiety, the tension, you will have to put yourself in his or her position. And that's why it is called the wearer knows where your shoe pinches. If my shoe is pinching, I will be the one to tell you where the shoe is pinching. So the state which takes care of the rights, human rights of its people, is the state which can be described as a state which is where rule of law prevails. Recently we have seen the gang rape case where the victim was murdered by burning her, and the statements and reactions of the people. People were very jubilant with the encounter which has taken place, alleged to have taken place. Our ministers have asked other police forces to take inspiration from these incidents. And a present member of parliament and a very well-known film actress say, "Der aaye durust aaye." Was she present at the time when the gang rape took place? Or was she present at the time when the alleged encounter took place? She was not. But she says, "Der aaye durust aaye." That means you have already predetermined without knowing that these 4 persons are the persons accused and that they have been killed by an encounter. So if this becomes the view, then you will not require any judgment of any court. You can decide for yourself. So such is the difference between the rule of law and rule by law. I am very thankful to the organizers for giving me an opportunity and honor of sharing my views on this subject with all of you. And I must thank each and every one of you, ladies and gentlemen, for being so kind and patient to me. Thank you.